Welcome, friends. This is Adrian Sinclair with Apodcast.com, and today my guest is Dr. Charles Randall Paul from the World Table. And the main topic we're going to be talking about is journalism. Welcome to the show, Dr. Paul.
It's good to be here.
You studied social psychology at BYU, and then business. You got your MBA at Harvard, and then social theory PhD at the University of Chicago Committee on Social Thought. Before we dive into more of your background, what got you into this space of journalism? And if you can just tell us really briefly, what is World Table? How did you get involved? And what are some of its goals?
About 20 years ago, I became very interested in studying conflict that was so intractable that it essentially was unresolvable. Those are conflicts over religion, over certain political positions, things that are non-negotiable, sort of like Solomon in the story where the two women came and said, it's my baby, and Solomon said, well, cut it in half. And Of course, one of the women said, well, you take the baby. He knew what the real mother was. That's an unresolvable conflict. You can't cut some babies in half. And the world is full of those. And as I studied those, I became more and more interested in how in public space, people assume that if we can compromise, you can come with win-win solutions, and everything will be cool and peaceful once we get there. If you were just rational enough, if you just were, put aside all your personal values, then we could have a common conversation here, right? Well, I soon found that was so fraught with difficulty. The lack of trust between people who couldn't say what they really believed with each other immediately started a problem. I became very interested in religious conflict and started a foundation called the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy to help people engage in these very difficult conversations. And as I became more and more interested in it, I also have an MBA, and I saw there might be a business plan of bringing people to a site where they could talk about religion and politics. When we got into that, we realized that we had developed a method for conversation on difficult topics that work on sports, could work on anything.
Right.
And the business model quickly moved from the very difficult thing of attracting people to one site to creating a software that could plug into any site where there was a possibility for public engagement. And everyone knows that's been on the internet knows how completely broken the comment systems are. They're full of trolls and all that crap. And that was our initial focus, is to clear the deck of all that difficulty, have a comment system that was affordable by newspapers that are very tight in their budgets, that can't afford to have every piece of input moderated by somebody, by human moderation. Right. It's just too expensive. The papers that can do that, the New York Times and a few others, they have the dough to do it. But most of our customers are regional and local newspapers, and we'll talk about that more, who wanted to have this involvement with the public, but were creamed by the trolls. We found a way of curing that, and then we'll also talk more about actually increasing the desire of people to engage in public conversations in trustworthy ways. So I went from trying to solve the world's problems of religion just to come down to a very also difficult problem of having online public conversations in an environment that's safe enough.
Right, because that's the difficulty, right? Diplomacy implies discussion, discourse, conversation,
and difference,
right? And exchange of ideas and exchange of perspectives on and coming to some kind of common ground, maybe.
Well, it's very interesting. We were going to use the word in our original foundation, dialogue, the Foundation for Religious Dialogue, because that has the implication of being common understanding, come to understanding, and everything will be cool. We soon found out that sometimes when you come to a deep understanding, you know why you should be enemies. You know, seriously, why you really can't come to a common ground that matters to you.
Right.
To say it, I think very directly, most people think if we all do good works together, if we all feed the poor together, everything else will work out. That's not the case as we see in the world. People try to do that, and that is helpful. I'm not saying it isn't. But I like to say that which separates us is much more important than that which unites us, in the sense that if let's just say someone came into your house and said, I want your kids, we all should have kids. No, these are my kids. Right. I want your wife. No, she's my wife. The idea of creating a marriage is to separate yourself from the others to create your unique thing, right?
Right.
So, as we were talking before, every good thing has a dark side. You create an outside when you create an inside, and so we just found that, especially the area of religion, a lot of people believe in a world to come, and they believe that that's an eternal world, and they believe that down here, what you do really matters. Really matters. So if you become so enthralled with helping people and at the same time do not voice your truth that you need to be baptized or you need to have enlightenment, helping people won't get you in the long run what you need to get. That's the belief system. And so I quickly came to realize that we weren't about resolving conflict. We were about managing it in a new way that allowed people to be themselves, actually engage in conflict,
right, but
in a mode that was respectful and persuasive, not aggressive and coercive. And we'll talk more about how that works actually in journalism too, and in a lot of places.
Right. I see how both of those things are so intertwined and connected. But I understand what you're saying. It's dialogue, not only as in to figure out what's in common, but also dialogue to determine how are we different so that you have a defined boundary so that these are kind of like...
You know how to actually, what we call engage in what we call mutually beneficial contestation, which means you try to persuade each other to change.
Right.
You actually, part of the dialogue in most cases, people, no, I'm coming into dialogue only to understand you. I have no motive other than mutual understanding. And I say, baloney to that. Every human being has so many motives, we don't know them all.
Right.
I'm trying to impress you right now, right? That's one of my motives. I also see people always in dialogue where they have some motive to influence the other party. If you don't like the word persuasion, influence, let's use that word.
Right.
You want to influence the other party. Well, how? In the case of many dialogues, you want to influence the position that they thought was superior to yours.
Right.
Is not.
Right.
Yours is superior to theirs. And I use the word superior to bring a reaction from your audience. Because most people in this day and age hate the word superior. They hate hierarchy. They think, who are you, you arrogant SOB, to say that you're superior than I am? I'm not arrogant. I'm sincere. I really believe my religion is the true religion, or my party is the right party. Do you want me to lie about that?
Right.
You see where I'm going?
I see where you're going with this. Gotcha. So very strong in terms of defining where you are so that you can use that in a conversation to persuade someone, hey, see it from my perspective.
That's right.
And if this is what you want to accept, then you have that option instead of like, okay, you still there, stay there, but we're going to find somewhere in the middle. So
yep.
See where you're
You
doing.
got it. You nailed it. And we like to say the price of admission to such a party is you give 50% of the time to your, at times, opponent, or at least your interlocutor,
right,
your conversation partner, to try to persuade you. That is the key.
Right. It's
to be truly open to the possibility of changing your own position. That's the irony of this thing. That's the deep social psychology of it.
Gotcha.
As you come away, we used to say when we were doing our original work, we'd bring people in to these conversations, and by the way, they were not on camera initially. They can be very, and this goes back to journalism we'll be talking about in a minute, they had to be very private, because people, when they're talking about their deepest values, especially with someone that they don't know very well, they don't want this to be recorded. if it gets very personal. It's interesting. The reason is they don't want their own constituents to see them talking with the enemy, possibly even giving voice to the enemy or to the critic. You see what I'm trying to say, how delicate this is?
Right. Times have changed now to the point that everything is recorded. Everything, like we got all these, hot mic, controversies or things that pop up here and there. So it's, and then younger generations right now, it's assumed that everything is recorded. Everybody's recording. Someone's always watching. So it brings an interesting perspective and sort of a transparency too to the journalistic. I'm kind of switching to the topic of journalism right now. So, with respect to what you're doing with journalism, and because it's a very, very hard problem to crack, what you've mentioned, which is providing a perspective and then opening it up for a conversation, for comments, but without it being crushed by the trolls and the automated and bots
or whatever you want. Yeah,
whatever
exactly.
you want to kind of, which is a huge thing right now. How to reshape that public opinion, right? That's the fight for people's minds.
Yep.
And so, how do you do that without a huge staff of people that are moderating this, removing these, banning these trolls? I mean, it's almost like a losing battle. So that's one aspect of that. Bringing into to the journalism.
You understand it very well.
So, what you're doing right now with the World Table, where you guys are addressing these issues, take me through how did you get, because you're one of the co-founders, right?
Right.
Of
with
that.
With a gentleman by the name of Brian Hall and Leo Brunick.
So it's a technology issue, but it's also a shifting of the audience mind as well, because we live in a world right now which is replete with sound bites, clickbait. Everybody's just, all these media outlets are really suffering because there's just so much content for free on the internet. Convincing someone to pay for quality content is just so much more difficult, because people just will go to YouTube or somewhere and just watch something which may, shift their perspectives and whatnot. They will not pay for it. If they want to support, maybe they'll Patreon or some other forms of support. But to make a business viable for these media outlets or newspapers, or even, like you said, on a smaller scale, local newspapers, in such a way that they are not crushed by these comments, by trolls, by all of that, and can produce quality content and convince the audience to pay for that content. How do you do that? I mean, that's almost like an impossible task.
Well, yeah, you've laid out quite a picture, and I think it's quite accurate. Let me back up to answer it by telling you something. When we first got into this idea of creating a software for any site that wanted to have conversations, we tried to find which channel would be the quickest way to market. And we saw journalism already had a desire for more interaction with its audience. Right. And we'll talk about why in a minute. And they were in dire need. I mean, the business was failing in many cases. So we said, let's go there. They need us the worst. And the problem with that business model was, if you're trying to sell to a customer that's dying, they're all dying, why get into the business at all?
Right.
So we had that in the back of our mind. We went initially, this would have been about 4 years ago, and we found that Warren Buffett had recently bought a group of local newspapers. And after about a year of holding them, he wrote an essay where he said, regional and local news, no one has cracked the business model that they need for the future. That was Buffett, right? So you are right. It's a very difficult problem. And until now, no one has cracked the no, I wish I could say until now, no one has cracked it. But we have cracked a little piece of it. And I'll be talking about it, which is called interactive news. The reason for your information and for your listeners' information is that the newspaper went down, of course, is that advertising in print news had a very nice traditional classical model. Everyone could make money. That's where you went for advertising. The big problem, I think, that happened when the internet became alive, like in any traditional business, those in the news business said, "Oh, that's not us. We're newspapers.
Right.
Papers.
Paper. Keyword
That's not
in it.
us. That's not us. That's not us. That's not us." And then all of a sudden, we're not that, right? And that's what happened. Is very quickly they lost their advertising to the internet, and without going into detail that your listeners probably wouldn't be interested in, the income off of a little piece of internet news is so small to a newspaper company compared to what it was for an ad in a newspaper that the revenue just dropped off enormously. I mean, we're talking about more than 60%.
Right.
What business could survive if their revenue is cut by 60%?
Right.
That's what's happened. And the newspapers have tried to adjust. And the way they've adjusted basically is either they've gone out of business or they've consolidated under one company. So there are probably 5 large newspaper companies now in the United States that own most of the newspapers. Let's just say there are 1,000 newspapers in our country, and they're owned by about 5 large owners. Buffett, by the way, has sold his interest to a larger group.
Wow, well, that doesn't spell any positive outcomes.
No one had cracked the code.
Right.
The fact is, right now, the people that are making the most money in the newspaper business have figured out how to consolidate their reporting and sell it to others. The New York Times, for example, and these other larger news outlets can sell their national news to the smaller newspapers. But those local newspapers and regional newspapers can't work on that model. They don't have the ability. No one in St. Louis is interested that much of what's going on in Tampa, right? So there's no way of consolidating that. So the question is, since there is demand, no one out on your audience would doubt that there's a demand for local news,
right?
And regional news. There is that demand. How is it being fulfilled now? Right now, what's happening is the newspapers are getting a small amount of revenue from local advertisers. All right, so they're bumping along doing that, and they realized that. And here's where it gets complex in the model. But if you understand it, you'll see what's happening and why the world table is important. If you can get more time on site, you'll get more pay per view. The more an advertiser knows that his ad will be viewed on your site, the more he'll pay you.
Right.
The problem with this is the way social media works today, and this is where all the local newspapers and regional newspapers didn't see it coming. Facebook and the other social media sites grab a person who's on Facebook, grabs a piece of news, and instead of discussing it on the newspaper site, they bring it to Facebook and talk with their siloed group of friends.
Right.
No value is given to the newspaper for that content that was, quote, hijacked to the social media site.
So Facebook benefits from that.
They benefit
because they can
exactly.
Serve the
you got it.
Mm-hmm.
And the so what was possible is a growing revenue on those sites, but it was taken. I won't say stolen. Taken to these social media sites. So what happened socially, and this is, I think, one of the things you're most interested in, is that we have now a traditionally public medium of the newspaper that was supposed to be objective, right? It was vetted by journalists, right? So even letters to the editor were read, right? And I mean, there was some degree of legitimacy for what was in your newspaper. Now all the public, not all, but much of the public discussion is going on in these silos, we call them. Personal silos or group silos of people who all believe the same thing.
Right.
And they're talking to each other about the news and not getting anything that is critical. And so we're having this national problem. Even if it weren't fake news, we'll talk about in a minute, it's their view can't be the true view. Those guys are crazy. We're not. And so we need, in other words, and the local and the regional newspapers saw the need to somehow engage the public on the newspaper site. How could we have them talk about the news on our site? Well, this is where the World Table came in. We saw that what was deeply broken is when people tried to talk on the site, trolls would come in and make it so miserable that the site itself would become a cesspool. And social psychology and, by the way, actual data has proven that a bad comment system depreciates the quality of the brand, no matter how strong the brand. That's why over half of the magazines and newspapers in the country have taken down their comment systems because it depreciates their brand. Just a few bad apples can really depreciate the brand. So we had to figure out a way of increasing the engagement on the newspaper site because, and I didn't make this clear, but what has changed is the public now wants to engage. It's interesting. They do it on their social media sites. There's this idea that you can say something and people will listen. Right. You don't have to go to journalism school. You can talk to your friends. Here we are today. Did you get a journalistic degree? I didn't.
I didn't.
Here we are.
Yes.
Right? This is a massively important idea that we do want to engage. But the newspapers have to be the legitimate place to vet engagement so people can trust the data they see on the newspaper site. It's not mommy and daddy talking over here. These are people that have somehow made it through to a legitimate place to have a public conversation. And we were able to do that, cream the trolls out, and bring the level of conversation up so that all the newspapers that use the World Table now are actually getting increased comments, better comments, more time on site, and therefore a little better advertising. Revenue.
So a couple of things right off the bat that I like what you said, which is local news and supporting local. There is interest for local news, and the support that's needed for local news. I believe in supporting local businesses and for instance local farmers, resilience in terms of local food source and food security. Support them. Instead of these huge, mega factories, agribusinesses, yeah. Have smaller things that you can locally have that relationship. On the news side, on publication and news media, supporting local businesses is equally vital because they need that revenue in order to produce quality content that you can then consume, right? Instead of resorting to some clickbaitish, tabloidish type of sensationalist news in order to drive that traffic. So I like what you're saying with this. What I want to explore is how do you deal with trolls, because it's just so easy. A strong piece that Facebook brings into the table is the identity management, right? They bring in, when you have a Facebook account, they are now really tightening this down so they know who you are. They can corroborate evidence about who you say you are in terms of your identity, so that when you do post or when something happens, it's not just some kind of a Russian hacker or someone from somewhere. So identity to me is a key component.
It's part of it.
Is to me it's a key component, because without that. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, you want to have accountability, so someone doesn't just create a bogus account and just start spewing some vitriol.
And that's exactly right.
And then on the other side,
it's very easy to do.
It's very easy to do that, right? Yeah. But on the other side, if you will not have a possibility of anonymous way of contributing your opinion, then there may be
repercussions
and backlash, right? From that. Now you have an opinion. How dare you, right? And so well, you said this and you said that, and therefore we're going to just rake you through the coals. So now you have this whole kind of space in which people are trying to navigate this. Well, I do have an opinion. I do want to be. If you have moral compass,
I want to be transparent.
I want to be transparent. I want to be able to express myself, and at the same time not having that being used against me, because then once that happens, twice that happens, and people are just retreating. They're like, I don't want to be part of that, because then some group is just going to be attacking that person, and that just feeds this fear. So therefore people go into the anonymous mode, right?
You really see it exactly the way it's happening.
But then along the way with that anonymous part, right, is that the trolls and all that. So again, to me, it's a dance. It's a delicate dance between identity and responsibility and accountability and transparency, but at the same time, freedom of speech in such a way that socially people still accept that and not use it as a weapon against you. And I'm going to sort of partially answer my question, then I'll ask you for your opinion on it. And in part, to me, that requires maturing of the audience, maturity of people who want those honest opinions, want perspectives, and can stick their heads outside of the silos that you mentioned. Because it's easy to get stuck in some kind of a group that everybody's just like, patting each other on the back. We're right. We're the only one. This is the only way. This is the only opinion and nothing else. And if you don't let any other opinion or any other perspective, then you're for the worse, because you haven't learned anything. You haven't learned anything. You're in this own little space. So you may be convinced that you're right, but that's just because everybody else is it's an echo chamber, right?
Yep.
And so to me, it means that in part, the public has to get educated. It has to allow for the dissenting voice and different perspectives, and be open to that discourse, be open to that conversation, versus like, oh, you said this, we're going to now for the rest of your life, we're going to just break you through the coals because that was your opinion. It's not a popular one. We don't agree with it, and now it's just going to be destroyed, which is something that's going to basically pull people from that kind of conversation at all. So I turn the table to you now, and
I'm tempted to go in a couple of ways with this one. I'm not going to let you completely into our black box because it is proprietary how we've been able to use algorithms plus human moderating, small amount of human moderating, very economic amount, to the tune of probably 1/5. Maybe even 1/10 of what a newspaper used to use for moderation, for human moderation. Now they only need a small amount with our software to get it done. They do need some. But I'll go to answer your question a little bit more specifically. The world table, after pivoting, which means making mistake after mistake after mistake, over a period of about 3.5 years, finally cracked the code, so to speak, of this problem. There were two big problems. One was, how do you keep brigading from happening? Brigading was either all your friends get on and vote you up, no matter what the content is, or all your enemies get on and vote you down, no matter what the content is, right? We found a way of quickly determining, very quickly determining by reputation of the person and by the speed with which things happened when brigading's happening. And when brigading's happening, we immediately mark down everybody that's involved in the grade. There's a grading system. Everybody on the world table gets a grade. They don't know specifically what it is in terms of our algorithms, but they have to do with behaving in a way that is respectful. And you get the highest grades if you treat someone who's disagreeing with you respectfully. You soar, okay? And the higher your score, the more weight you have in your influence at the world table. So, to make a long story short, we found the way to get the trolls was to decrease their potency. So they thought they're hammering away, and all of a sudden no one's listening to them. They don't know it, but no one's listening to them. They're being dropped out of sight. And it was because of the way they engaged. It had nothing to do with the content, but with the way they engaged. Because we were, Scylla and Charybdis, you have to get right down through the middle of those. You saw one of them, but in newspapers, you do not want to be a censor, right?
That's right. On
the other hand, you have a public responsibility to keep obscenity and junk off the public. I mean, there could be everyone, no matter where you are, there are things that you would not want to see in your newspaper.
Right.
I don't care how open your values are.
Right.
There's a line, right? And so you've got those two things. And we were able to very quickly get to a point where we brought it down to a very narrow line where if you look at the world table, everyone actually has a visible score. And they don't know quite how they got it. But if you're a troll, believe me, you're gone. The way we have the dial set is the publisher can set the score level that they want seen, all the way down to you can see anything. But the ratings push the bad guys down to the bottom. And it shows very clearly in the data that most people only read the first 3 or 4 comments. Then if they're good, they'll keep going.
They'll keep on going, right.
And so the key was only getting the good stuff, the highly rated stuff at the top.
Right.
And so I think you can see what we did. Without censoring, the newspaper can just say, we'll let it all. If they want to go down the junkyard and play, they can look at the junk.
Right.
But that's their problem, reader. We have given you, we vetted. We're a responsible newspaper. We put to the top the comments, just like we would with a letter to the editor. Within our own way, we've created a place for the best comments. And lo and behold, it worked. It created more time on site. The brand went up in value to people. And here's the key. And I didn't make it clear before. If you were to send a comment to the New York Times and they used it, the chances are 1 in 10,000 that they get there, because thousands of people are reading that. But in the regional and local newspapers, you've got a shot.
Right.
You actually have a shot, and we have what we call editor's picks, which the editor of the newspaper or the journalist who's writing the article say, that was cool. They hit it, and that gives you a special rating at highlighting is up.
Right.
And we actually create a page at the newspaper of comments. And what we found was comments are content. In the local and regional area, people want to see what their neighbors are saying.
Right.
It's very interesting. Comments are content if they're interesting and they're good and they're funny or whatever it is. And our algorithm allows people to rate a comment for its humor, for its depth, for various more. It's not just a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Right.
So
more granularity.
There's a granularity to it that really helps people understand why that comment was raised up. And so positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and some clever ways of algorithmically quickly getting it done. The journalist now also at the world table has done something new. And this, listeners need to hear this, or viewers. What's changed in the last 20 years, well, whatever it's been, however long we've had the internet, is this idea that you can participate. And journalism has for years, to be blunt, journalists have looked down on the public, the unwashed.
Right. We're the
unwashed.
Experts. We're the experts. Let me deliver some.
Exactly. I don't really want to hear from you. Every once in a while, we'll let a letter to the editor through if it's really good. Right. That's not flying anymore.
Right.
As you said earlier, people want it's more of a democracy.
It can't be a one-way street. The internet is not a one-way street.
And so, where regional and local news can participate. This is where Warren Buffett wasn't able to crack it, but where we've helped crack it, and where we think there is a future, is to create this space where people can have public engagement and have a pretty good shot of being heard if they're decent, right? If there's some quality to it. And it's just a smaller pond, but you get the same vibe of being reinforced that you're part of a democracy, you're part of this discussion. It could be what's happening down at City Council tonight. It could be whether they put the traffic light in the wrong location. It could be tax policy, whatever it is. you can now get on a newspaper and have a town hall type experience that's more vetted. And so we think that's part of the future of journalism that will eventually be cracked, will eventually be something people are willing to pay for. So I'll say it right now. People have to pay for it. And it won't just be by advertising. So if I'm right, John Huntsman, who was one of our early customers at the Salt Lake Tribune, we were able to clean up the trolls at the Salt Lake Tribune. It was it was well known to be one of the worst newspapers in the country for trollish behavior. A lot because of the local religious communities where people were piling on all sorts of, there's a history there if you live in the Salt Lake area. Interestingly enough, the same kind of problem exists in Pennsylvania. We learned in the Amish areas where an entrenched community has a certain reputation. People either love it or they don't. And long story short, Huntsman bought the Salt Lake Tribune because it was going down and tried to figure out a model that would get it to work from an advertising standpoint and could not make it work. But he wanted to have that newspaper survive. So he's the first regional newspaper in the country, large newspaper, that has gone to a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit organization. They just converted it to a nonprofit, and they're asking their subscribers to donate to the nonprofit, get a write-off,
right,
and say, we're part of the community. We want this news. We will pay for it, right? So that's part of the future. People will say, if it's all gone, hey, we want it. We'll pay something for it. So that hasn't yet turned, but that's going to turn. When enough newspapers go down and people really want the news, they're going to say, hey, we've got to pay for something. The other side of it is time on site will increase when two-way journalism starts to happen, where the public is actually part of the journalistic process, and those who are highest rated become citizen journalists, right? Yeah. Not only are they feeding information to the reporters, but they're actually commenting. They're becoming opinion makers too, which is what newspapers do. Right. They both report facts and they create opinions. So that's the idea. The big idea here on your show tonight is two-way journalism is growing. We have a method at the World Table to really enhance it.
I've seen some of that happen on some sites where the author of an article interacts and comments. I think MarketWatch was one of them, TheStreet.com, several implemented, and I could see where there was a place for civil conversation, dialogue between, and even the author had enough of, maybe the ego was not as inflated, where they admitted like, oh wow, yeah, okay, I guess I made a mistake over here, and it was again part of that conversation. And what I have to believe what happens to the participants of that, they are, if you brought up like, hey, we think that you may have an error over here, and they revisit, edit, maybe even errata, whatever, fix it, and credit, like, wow, then those who participated are that much more likely to continue doing that. And now you have this positive feedback loop instead of like this negative.
You got it. That should be the future, where we teach our kids in our civics classes in junior high school. Hey, it's up to you to be part of the news.
Right.
It's up to you. If you see something, put it into the local newspaper. And build your reputation. Here's the other idea. When we first got into this business, we realized it's really a reputation model that we're talking about here. People who have a reputation for influence are going to be very important. We know this happens all over the place for products.
It's social proof.
It's social, exactly.
Right.
And so we spent probably $1 million going down a path that we should have gone down years later. Right. But when we saw it was reputation, we tried to figure out a way of saying quickly whether this commenter is commenting on ballet and he's really a skier. So he really has no credibility in that professional area, right? Or commenting on politics and really it doesn't know anything about that area. So trustworthiness really comes on 3 levels. One is motive. Do you believe the person has your interests in mind? Really cares about you? That's the first level of trust. The second is competence. Does that person have the they might really like you and want to help you, but if they don't have the competence to be useful in that particular area, you don't trust them. And the third is resources. Whether they have the access. They might be competent and trustworthy, but they don't have the resources to deliver on whatever you're trying to accomplish. They either can't get the word out, or don't have the money, or are not plugged in enough. And so we have found if you get those three things together, your trust score is extremely high in public. The one that we started to have great difficulty was actually in the competence area. The algorithm to say that Adrian just made a comment which should be heavily discounted, because even though his motive was right and he has a lot of dough, he's commenting about something he doesn't know anything about. Right. And it sounds so easy to say that, but to get the right algorithm in a world of complexity is very difficult. So we finally just backed off that deep level of individual identity trust for another time. That's part of our future thinking. It has big brother problems, as you can well imagine. Would you want to disclose all that? And we could go into that detail later.
Let's talk about that, because that's that part of the identity trust model, right? Like was it Adrian that made that comment, or was it another Adrian that made that comment, right? Yeah. And so how do you see this in the future, so that people can have that reputation model follow them, and would be attached to a real person, a real identity, and at the same time allowing that person to the freedom of speech. We're going back to that.
I'm going to address that issue of being creamed by people and the freedom of speech issue in a minute, because I really find that to be probably the psychology of that is the most important thing you've brought up in terms of my business right now, and candidly in terms of American democracy right now. Right. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. But on the reputation score problem.
Yeah, I think to distill my question is, How do you deal with identity management, so that the reputation that identity, that person, or maybe not a person,
bot for that matter,
right, is going to be tied into a real person or a real identity? Like, do we want to strive to prove, like, a lot of financial services, they'll do, like, know your customer. They have to prove, like, you have to literally scan your driver's license before you can open up an account, what have you. So I really know that you are you. Your phone, we're going to call you, we're going to verify all these different things to really make sure that you are who you say you are, right? And that's a step in building that identity model. But then with that, once I proved, okay, so now we're going to allow you on our platform, and now we know that whatever Randall or Adrian said on this, that's them. We know 100% because we have all these and other factors that are proving that those are the people who they say they are, right? So, but with that, then there comes the repercussion of like them voicing their opinions and then being marked down by some kind of algorithm because it may not fit into
whoever's commenting on or commenting on them. And to be clear, then, I already tried to address our algorithm at the World Table, which is you actually get more credibility for people who disagree with you saying that was a fair comment.
Right.
Or that was an interesting comment. Mm-hmm. Dead wrong. Yeah. Dead wrong, but well written. Right. That kind of thing.
Without malintent.
Yeah. But, in other words, when your opponent, if now I'm giving away one of the hints, but it's a good hint. It's the way we like to say, if people are going to game our system, everyone's going to win, because the way to game our system is to learn, if you have someone you really disagree with, say something that's positive about them when you're criticizing them, right? And you'll both win. And it's a fascinating positive feedback loop. So there's that one aspect that we've found actually builds people on our site. The other aspect, though, is the anonymity issue that you brought up earlier. There are some places in the world where anonymity is required, otherwise you're dead.
That's right.
I work in the Middle East and have gone to China several times, and we have big plans for an international rollout eventually. But believe me, the cultural difficulties for what we're talking about, public speech in various countries, is just enormous. So I'm not trying to downplay what you're bringing up here. We realize that anonymity can be a positive and a negative thing.
Right.
And so all we did was to give people more points if they disclosed who they were.
Gotcha.
You can be anonymous. You can be a bot, right? And the content and the way you play as a bot is rated according to any standard. But if you disclose who you are actually given more credibility points because you are taking a risk,
right?
A public risk, and we want to give people benefit for that. So that's one way of answering your question. Another way of going at it is to say the education problem. I know that you're interested in education, and I couldn't agree with you more that this is not a problem of journalism. This is a cultural problem in our country that needs to start in the grade and middle schools, where people are taught, and we have. That's one of our other silos. Will be an education program to bring world table trainings into the schools, so kids can see up on the screen two people that are disagreeing with each other, and they can rate them and how they're treating each other, and see that it's okay, darn it,
right,
that they disagree with each other, and as long as they do it in a certain mode, right?
Right.
And so we're trying to teach young people how to disagree. It's fascinating that instead of saying we just got to be nice to each other, that's not the answer.
That is not the answer.
That has never been the answer.
I agree with you.
We've got to be. You've got to respect your opponent. You've got to respect. And the pragmatic reason is, this is good social psychology. If you want to influence somebody, they have to feel, underline the word feel, that they can influence you. It's amazing what happens. Marriage therapy teaches this, and this is where we learned it originally. John Gottman and his work. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's fantastic work.
I've heard the name from my wife.
Gottman described successful marriages. He studied successful marriages, and he said in successful marriages over 20 years, 2/3 of their disagreements are never resolved. Never resolved. They get the win-wins compromised over here. But what the couple learns to do is to have a kind of a rhythmic engagement of the unresolvable issues.
Right.
Where they say, to be me, we've got to come back. I want to raise our kids and put them in public schools, and you think they belong in private schools. I've got to bring this up again this year. And the couple learns how to do this in a way that enhances their respect for each other. They don't get angry, but they're intense. And so we learned that actually trust and respect go up when you can disagree with someone and they remain engaged with you.
Right, because it's at least you know where you stand in a way, right? Because you define look, I disagree with you on these points. It's like that saying well, let's agree to disagree, versus oh, yeah, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of go along, but you know that my intent is different. So I may just to appease you, I may say the things that you want to hear, but my opinion has not been persuaded, hasn't been changed, so I will still continue to do what I believe, right? But But if we set up the table straight, so to speak, in a way that this is a platform where we can persuade each other.
Right. You got it. It's that mutuality platform.
Right.
You got it. And if kids can learn that, then there's less fear.
Right.
And there's more what's the word I'm looking for? There's more social value and prestige, candidly, to putting it out there. Letting it out there, your word earlier, transparently putting it out there, taking that risk in public. And not being slapped down, but being criticized respectfully and not wimping out, but staying in the engagement. It's a cultural learning that we've got to teach people, and it's going to take a generation, I'm afraid. But until that happens, really, we're going to have what we have now, I think, too much, which is only a certain personality type will actually engage on the internet. We have found, interestingly enough, about 1% of people ever really engage in commenting. But 60% of the people who read an article will go down and read the first comments or second comments. So comments are content.
Yeah.
And the newspaper wants to increase the quality of that content. We want to increase the quality of that content by increasing the numbers of people who comment, who have the guts to do so. And so you can see that it's a chicken and the egg thing we're working on.
Yeah.
Both the newspapers making it easier for it to happen and teaching the citizens that they can actually make a difference.
Sounds like a social experiment.
It is, and it's actually out there and working. I mean, we're actually growing the number of people who are commenting. I haven't told you our secret sauce, but I will tell you this. We learned that one of the clickbait deals is to have a survey. You've probably seen the 10 best this or the 10 best there. To look at it. People are interested in those kinds of listings. And so we have a very simple algorithm that allows a journalist in the first third. By the way, most people only read the first third of an article. Very important. They don't, if they're not interested, they don't. Yeah. But in the first third, we have a little algorithm that any journalist can just hit a button, put it right after the sentence. Did the judge get it right? It pops up as you're reading the article on the Supreme Court. Did the judge get it right?
With it as you're going through it.
As you're going through it, you are reading, and people are what we call leaning in then.
Right.
And we have found only 1% of people comment. 2/3 of readers will say yes or no.
Very interesting.
Fantastic. We have gotten them to engage. And then the next pop-up is down. Hey, why did you say that? Wink, wink. Well, it's boom, and they've made a comment. So we've enticed them on a subject, and then it's brought down to the comment system, and they might indeed continue to comment, engage more. So our goal is not just to get the trolls out. That was just the first step. Our goal was to create two-way journalism, where people who wouldn't normally engage would. The other thing we learned, the big one we learned was engagers. What percentage of engagement would you say is men versus women commenting? Online commenting, not social media. I'm talking about online commenting.
Online commenting. I would tend to believe women would lead.
You're wrong.
Really?
Yes. I respectfully say you're wrong.
Wow. Why do you think that's
many more. Approximately 80% comments are made by men online on these comment boards.
Wow. Okay.
Women love relationships.
Right.
They do much more commenting. You were right.
That's what I was going on.
You were right. I tricked you a little bit by saying, I tried to help you by saying social media.
Social media, right.
They comment like crazy on social media.
Right.
But they feel safe there. They're relational. I'm not a sexist, but there's no social scientists of any ilk would argue with the fact that women are more relational oriented, men are more production oriented, and as a whole, and a woman doesn't want to have even the risk of being beaten up in a relational way on the internet. So when the trolls the women would have nothing with it. Some men will say, "Oh yeah, let's get in there and fight like trolls," right? That just doesn't. That's not a woman's sport, so to speak.
Yeah.
That might change. I'm not someone who's saying things are set in stone. I'm just saying what is right now. And we wanted to bring women back in to the public discourse, and to do that, we had to make it safer for them. So that's another reason why our site has a chance. We create relationships between the journalist and the commenter. There's a relationship there. They know who they are. And we also don't have the trollish behavior. So we haven't been in business long enough to have the stats yet on how many more women are doing this, that one of our goals is to create a more democratic society, to have more women engaged in public, not just in social media.
Very interesting. I'm surprised a little bit at the but then again, now that I look at that I think about it, I do see more comments by men in that more combative way when someone is saying something, whether it's a trollish behavior or just something
just an argument.
Just an argument.
Yeah.
And then you can see the extent. Again, I don't know, because you don't, just I don't know if there were real names, men's names, but it just kind of sounded like men just arguing, like, you don't know what you're talking about, idiot. Like, oh, that's just the most stupid stuff ever, and so on. It just kind of goes on. But I do agree with you what you said, that if especially that's true to me, if I see top comments and I see right away that this is just going to be a huge trolling thing, I just don't have the time for that.
Right.
So there's no value in that whatsoever. Right. Now, down the line somewhere in there might be some valuable comments that actually were, good, would be good to read, but again, they're just hidden. They're just buried in this whole nonsense.
Right.
So having an algorithm which kind of brings it up and then highlights it, or even having the author the capability of highlighting something that's right.
The editor's choice.
The editor's choice. I think that's good. I love the two-way journalism that you described. I think that is the way of the future, and it's in a active way of participating and integrated right along in the article, not necessarily just all the way somewhere in the comments.
That's right.
And getting interesting stats, because then that can inform. So it's almost like an ecosystem of
you
things
got
that feed
it.
together.
We eventually, as a business model of having the stats, what do the people in Rhode Island think on this subject? Well, if the World Table ends up developing enough data of what the public is doing there,
very interesting.
Then we'll have data that's interesting politically, commercially, all sorts of ways. I will say this, that it takes a lot of data, and we're just getting started.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I assume that there's a machine learning AI component to all of this to do this as it should. Yeah. And so that obviously has to have a lot of data to hone in and refine those algorithms to help it to be more and more accurate.
Right.
The question for you is whether you guys are exploring blockchain technology to maybe incorporate it in the future. That would be an interesting component, or maybe even a conversation to make some of the things immutable, meaning so things can't be. And this is going to be a good kind of segue into talking about fake news, right?
Yep.
Because it's easy to create content, it's easy to fabricate things, and it's also easy. Conversely, it's easy to call anything fake news.
When we started our business 5 years ago, probably a year and a half into it, when we were realizing, hey, this is a reputation business. This isn't just a comment system,
right?
But how do we protect people's reputations? How do we make sure that this anonymous person is trustworthy? Blockchain. We were right at the early part of blockchain where we saw the idea of a decentralized system of verification would be a way of developing a reputation system. So 6 months into that, $500,000 to $1 million into that, we realized, holy smokes, this is much more complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, we were right at the beginning of the blockchain surge, and we backed off and said, let's just get out of the reputation business and get into the business that we can handle now. And as you can see, with our simple algorithms and some modest amount of moderation, we're delivering a product that works. We have in mind just what you said. Our long-term goal will be to have a system in place that brings trustworthiness to the internet. It's interesting. One of our original marketing advisors, a guy named John Carosella, once told us, he said, the internet was designed for interconnectivity, not for trust. Had the original designers of the internet said, oh, interconnectivity can go as bad as it can go well. we need trustworthy interconnectivity.
Right.
Then perhaps the internet would have had a slower startup where these very difficult issues that we're talking about now were addressed. As it is, no one has cracked that code yet. Blockchain has a very good chance of being part of that system. But as I implied earlier to you, or at least inferred, I think, the question of reputation requires more than just big data gathering. There has to be a level of, so far anyhow, AI hasn't gotten to the level of sophistication to be able to say that you are competent and would have the appropriate motive and the resources to be someone who, in this particular transaction or in this particular communication, is dead on trustworthy, right? Right. But it's coming. That will come.
Right. That's why I was so excited to, when we set up this podcast and started recording, because reading on your website, what you guys are doing with this, I realized how big, how gargantuan problem this is, because this is not a single problem. This is a system of issues that has, and all of them have to be to a certain level resolved in order for the whole thing to work. It's not just like, oh, I have a secret pill over here, take that, I'll talk to you in the morning, everything's going to be fine. It's a lot of things. And like you said, it was first and foremost about interconnectivity and resilience. It was a military concept behind how resilient can a network be to route messages.
Yep.
So
Yep.
The good thing is that, and this I'm just going to channel my inner geek right now, is that you layer things on top of it. So on a transport of all of it, you can layer other things, which is like identity management, just to kind of verify who's who.
Sure.
And again, but just like everything, the duality is like because you can instill, and this is people will like or not like this in the future, if you install something that's going to be, you must be 100% verified who you are in order to participate in this game, then that's going to have some pros to it. But then the cons will be the whole anonymity issue, right?
Yep.
How are we going to do freedom of speech without repercussions of some kind of backlash, right?
Yep.
And so there has to be two modes of it. And so what you described is kind of an interesting melding of the two. So like, hey, if you do disclose who you are, you're going to get props for it. You're going to
be paid for it. Yep.
If you choose to be anonymous, it's not like you're going to be just like, oh, it's anonymous, this is probably a troll. It still has to have a voice, which may be then validated by other people who will be disclosing their identity.
Exactly.
Right? So it could be that
they have more power to validate.
Right. So it could be validated like, hey, I'm gonna just throw this out there. It may be controversial, so I'm gonna do it anonymously. And some people that are vetted in a sense that where they disclose their identity, they're like, we like that as a perspective. We don't agree with it, but we do like it.
You got it. So and it goes up.
That has to be the secret. That has to be the mechanism in there.
That's it.
Because then you allow for the both worlds to exist, because they both have need and space to exist.
I think you've nailed it. I think the way to it, it's AI. So you probably saw the movie a few years ago of the guy who fell in love with an AI. I can't remember was it her or she or something. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was really a clever movie. It
was like a phone, right? It was just
a phone, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she, he just fell in love with her, and it was over. That AI had such great social psychological EQ, right? Not IQ, EQ.
Right. Emotional intelligence.
That she passed the Turing test, right? Completely. So far, it's only in the movies.
Right.
And the subtleties, you and I are talking now, and I've read subliminally the way you've looked at me, whether your face just went or you just nodded your head a little bit. There's so many ways you told me that you're kind of in and really interested versus, oh, I better change subjects because you're getting bored, or, you really didn't like that, you're being polite versus, the subtleties.
Subtleties, right.
They all have to do with trust. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm getting at here. In other words, it's not just your professionalism, your education. It's do you, in certain circumstances, do you really care about me? Or are you just patronizing me?
Right.
Right? Are you just doing it to get more points? Right? Whatever
What's
it is.
the motive behind it?
And so that motive question comes back in.
Right.
And then it gets super complex.
Right.
And so I think we'll find that it's so much easier for Bitcoin to approve a transaction. This was this person and this person did it. Yes, it was a real transaction. It really happened.
Right.
Versus, was that a completely trustworthy person? You can say a trustworthy transaction.
Right.
Very different than say, I want that person to influence me in my life.
Right.
I want that person that person really cares about me. And in other words, where are we going to be able to replace human contact with either AI or over the internet contact and make it anywhere near the level of human contact?
Right.
That's one of the things we're really talking about.
Right. Well, one of the things that I do want to that I wanted to clarify is that blockchain and blockchain technologies as a distributed system, it can be utilized for many different sort of like aspects of this, employed in different junction points with the whole technology that you talked about. And some of it is the immutability of data. So it could be recorded that this article has not changed, right? So it's not like, so it's all still connected so that someone can create an article that may get certain types of comments, and then the article, the content itself may be changed, and these comments may still be, now these are, disjointed, right?
Yes.
So that could be a way of manipulating. But with blockchain, you could literally, you could prove that this has not changed, or if it has, these are the specific changes.
Yeah, you could.
Right?
The chain is there.
Right, and because it's distributed, then it's not like one organization holds the keys to it.
Very good point.
And in the same way, the identity management, if someone just has the keys to the kingdom for identity management, that they can change and modify, and so then you don't have integrity. And we're going back to the whole CIA model of confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yep.
Not this intelligence agency, but I'm talking information security now.
Yes.
So that's where blockchain can kind of help out from that perspective.
Amen to that.
Right?
You've got it was not just a contract.
Right.
The idea of the reliability of the information.
Right. So someone can't manipulate, because increasingly as people buy into the system of, all right, let me disclose my true identity and voice my things, I want to make sure that someone cannot twist this into something else and then make me, we already see what's happening in China in terms of social experiment and social credits. They literally have a system in place, surveillance-based, when they will rate you how you behave. And
according to the party.
According to the party, right. And you'll get, slapped on the wrist if you do this, if you don't walk the right way, if you jaywalk, if you do, then whether you can leave the country for a vacation or not is going to be all based on that. So this is like a, bad episode of Black Mirror on Netflix.
Oh, yes. Remember that one? Oh, that was such a crude. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend that to everybody, but those people who want to see something very crude, but very shocking, that's quite a show.
That, in a way, maybe that was the point of it. Like, hey, you can't rent a car because you're not trustworthy enough in your social proof, metrics space.
Well, you've actually brought up the big brother problem there. And in a society, a democratic society, we would think on one level, well, the democracy will let that all work out. In other words, there'll be enough voices on a newspaper that's not going to happen. That's the theory, right? That we need that space. The very way to combat Big Brother is to have what we call the fourth estate, journalism. That was the idea.
That was the idea. Right?
That was the idea of it. And so we've got to protect that space. And I think we can. Even in our own country, the very problem you just brought up is something that I think we need to be honest about. Identity politics today, whatever you think of your identity or someone else's identity, or all the identities all of us have, plural, the idea of creating a social opprobrium for someone who behaves in a certain way, with whom you disagree, is almost as bad as the Chinese. In other words, you can't be hired by a university if you believe this.
Right.
Well, the Chinese say you can't get a job, or you can't travel if you believe this. It's very interesting how, in our own way, we are creating these blocks, at least,
right,
of influence in our country that are shutting down honest conversations. There's a group called the Heterodox University Group. John Haidt, who is a social psychologist at NYU, started it with a group of other people. When he saw, he's on the left, when he saw that people couldn't come to his university and other universities and make controversial speeches. And there were trigger alerts in classes on subjects that needed to be discussed, but students were taking offense at even bringing the topic up. He realized that there's a problem in our country today on both the left and the right, where people put their ears up and say, that's blasphemy. Right. It's almost like you're back in the Middle Ages, where you're being tried for blasphemy if you say something that is egregious to a certain person's value system. And that, as you can see from my point of view, comes back to the original problem of unresolvable value differences. Do we just shut each other out, go into our own private worlds, and have nothing but eating McDonald's hamburgers together, and that's the only thing we can do? Or do we have a society where we can actually be whole, open, and engaged in difficult conversations with each other over values that are, yes, they're going to offend each other? We've got to learn that that's part of being human in a democratic society. And it's a good social psychology would say you can be offensive and do so by what you believe, but not do so by your heart, by your motive. You don't want to hurt someone, but what you sincerely believe, they feel as hurt. Likewise, in return, right? So somehow we've got to get to that point.
As you're saying these words, Jordan Peterson popped in my head.
Jordan is definitely a guy who would understand that.
And so that really resonated with me what you said, because he can be offended, like everybody can be offended about everything, and that's part of the problem that we have right now. Because you're going to be just treading along so carefully not to step on any toes, and you will anyways, then what's the point? Because then you don't even have an opinion of your own, because you're going to change it to fit everything, and then no one will have respect for you because you don't have really an opinion, because then you have this opinion for you, this opinion for you, this opinion for you.
And you won't have respect for yourself either.
Exactly. So and that's the problem. That's why I think part of the kind of counterbalance, the pendulum is swinging sort of back now, where people are rebelling against this, because we all believe that certain level of maybe political correctness, but I like what you did, because you disassociated sort of like heart, or like maybe that malice, intent,
motive,
that I want to hurt you, so I'm going to say something and to offend you.
Yep.
Or I have an opinion that you just don't agree with it, so that may be offensive to you.
Yes.
But that's still my opinion.
Yes.
And I'm not projecting it at you with some kind of malicious intent.
Right.
This is you take it or you leave it, what have you. And I think that's where Jordan Peterson did such a good service to everyone, when he was arguing things and was able to say those things that, look, this is my opinion, here's the rationale for it, but it was not used as a blunt instrument to kind of hammer someone else who on the other side, and I think he was capable of delivering that.
The great social psychological fact, and he is he was trained as a clinical psychologist, as you know, is the mutuality. Mm-hmm. In other words, Peterson's a master at this. If you watch him, he literally has eye contact with his interlocutor, often his opponent.
Right.
And that there's no question that he's listening.
Right.
There is no question that he is listening to that person. He's not trying to make arguments. He's trying to take in that person's argument, right? So he can then, if you were a marriage therapist, so that he could repeat back to that person in a very potent way just what that person honestly said, and make the argument for that person as potently as he could. Then great trust can be between them when he says, have I made your argument right? It's a solid argument, isn't it? But here's why it's wrong.
Right.
You take each other's walls down that way, and then you have a real conversation.
For some people, and for others, what drew a lot of attention to him is the fact how, quote unquote, he destroyed someone in an argument.
I hate that stuff.
And that's
he would not like that stuff.
He wouldn't. And that kind of sheds a light a little bit on how much growing we still have as society in terms of, because people just are so drawn to, like, if you see a lot of YouTube videos and whatnot, those which get a lot of views and clicks is like this kind of drama, this clickbait, artificially created conflict. So people are like, all right, who's going to crush who in some kind of dialogue and that's just.
Let's face it, evil and explosions, they're photogenic. Goodness and peace, not very photogenic.
Not sexy as, so it's like, oh yeah, look at this argument. This person destroyed this person verbally. And that's what draws a lot of eyeballs. And so I still think that, maybe there's place for that, but I think it's just so biased right now in sense of how many people are into that kind of drama, that they want those tiny little snippets. We're getting shorter and shorter. YouTube is already too long now for most things, right? Then you have this, now it's like this TikTok where you have like 30 seconds or even like, it's just, soon it's just going to be 4 images, and that's going to be the whole message.
Well, you are bringing up something that's very oriented toward journalism right now. You'll notice all the online journalism has pictures now on the top of every article, right? Yeah. Large pictures, quality pictures. So they're trying to face that reality that journalism is not just words anymore. The shortness is a big problem. The first people that were into clickbait were journalists. It's called a headline.
Right. That's true. That is true.
They understood that. You're not going to read the whole newspaper.
Right. It's the hook that gets you in.
It's the hook.
I get it. But the clickbait...
but you're right about the problem, and deeply right. In other words, somehow, and I don't know how this is going to change. I don't know how it's going to change. My own kids, I've tried to say, read more. It's so delightful to read, these are dead people, but they're still alive. You can read as if they're alive, right? Their thoughts, right. And they go, that's great, Dad. And so we are raising a generation now of people who are not used to long reads at all.
Right.
And I don't know exactly what we're going to do about it, because depth does matter. The fact that you told me we could have an hour conversation blew my mind away. I said, I don't know what this guy's doing. It can't be for money.
It's not. It's actually funny. They mentioned that because I had a CEO of a company over here, a local company that does 3D printers, and they 3D print like with concrete, so they can literally print a house.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, phenomenal technology, and is going to definitely change the world, and I love that. And so at the end of it, I invited him as a guest over here, and he actually wanted to pay me. He wanted like, so what should I make the check out of? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? This is just a conversation. Right. I love what you're doing. I think this is really going to change the world for the better. Yeah. And I wanted to give you this platform to talk about it and learn a little bit more about you, so people just don't read a little snippet on your website, so they can feel and get the person, the full person behind it. Right?
Sure.
But going back to my opinion on this is, long-form conversations. I believe that, recording these hour, 2 hour, even sometimes maybe 3 hour conversations is the way to go, because then you have an option of taking some snippets and clips out of it that will be maybe topic-oriented, topic-specific, and that's something that in this society of these short, soundbite elements, that's what can get someone interested. This is like a little preview, and then they can look at that and like, wow, I like what Randall is saying. At least they have then an option of listening to the whole thing. Right. Versus if on the outset I would say like, we got 15 minutes, at 7.5 minute mark we're going to hit this, and I just put you right in the box, and now you got to deliver like a TED talk.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, but it's just like it's just so compressed that you really don't have enough time to get to know you and to really explore these topics.
Right.
So I believe that both of them will have a place where you have these long form conversations, and then extracts out of that to get people interested.
One of the goals we had a few years ago was to use a world table format for a conversation between two presidential candidates, and the conversation would take place without a moderator in a chair set up like this.
That would be great.
Without a moderator, the candidates would agree they were going to talk for an hour and a half, and they agree in advance on the topics so that they would not blindside each other, because that's another thing we found in doing our work. Trust is built if you don't blindside someone.
Right. Which a lot of those debates basically...
Exactly.
Again,
gotcha.
That's right, yeah.
Instead of, let's go... And no one ever says, that was a good point.
Yeah.
Why don't we go there?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the difficulty. Right. Can you imagine two presidential candidates having the relaxation to be able to tell each other, that was a good point?
Yeah.
I've got to rethink that.
Right.
It would change America. It would change America. So this is what we need to do, is create those formats, long-form formats,
right,
to model.
Right.
Because part of our education program we haven't told you about is eventually we will have modeling in grade schools and in school of people who are doing a bad job and doing a good job of having difficult conversations.
Right.
And when the kids can see that that's happening, when we can see our leaders actually care about each other and about the facts, that the way to do away with fake news is have an hour and a half conversation.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That isn't spun.
Right.
Where the other guy, where you're really having a conversation.
Right. That's it.
It comes out that you don't know what you're talking about in some areas, and you do in some.
Right. We should, again, and it goes a little bit to the big thing that's happening right now, which is vulnerability and being open to sharing your own vulnerabilities. Yep. I'm not sure how much our politicians are open to that, because I think we still are in this kind of, even outside of the party system, I call it the sports team mentality. It's my team against your team, in a sense of
tribalism.
One is going to win and the other has to lose.
Yep.
It's not a conversation where we can actually still debate these things and just because I believe that most people are good people. It's just that they fall into this tribalism of my party, your party, and even if you would have a good idea, I'm not going to support it because it's not going to go against my little tribe over here, right?
Yep.
But I like what you said with having these long conversations with between maybe even different candidates. I had Karen Hyatt, who's running actually for Senate over here, local government, I think, and so I'm going to talk to her, and I think there's something to it. I mean, I think we should probably promote that locally, because just the same as with newspapers, I believe that the change with newspaper cycle and media and distribution and trustworthiness of articles and fake news, I think the movement has to start from local to global, not from global to local, because it's not the top down, maybe in the middle somewhere. I don't know. I might be wrong, but I believe that I think it starts with small things which matter to people dearly, and because it affects them locally.
Yep, you got it. And politics is local, as well as national and international. And you've got a good point there. Newspapers in the past have been conveners of conversations, of debates. That's been that's been done in the past.
Yeah.
But again, it would be very interesting for our gubernatorial, for example.
My wheels are spinning.
Yeah. You should have it. I mean, you could really do something wonderful. The key, if you're going to take some advice from me, would be to do it without you being the moderator.
Right.
You would start it out.
Oh, yeah.
Take credit.
I'll be just a platform to...
You brought these dudes together,
right.
And you'll take full credit for that, right? Or dudettes, or whatever they are. I don't know. Yeah, this guy and this gal, whatever. Gender is so crazy these days. You got to be careful what you say. But you brought them together.
Yeah.
But they have enough discipline and honesty and chops to be able to handle their own conversation.
I love this. I love.
You see where we're going with that?
Yeah.
And then it
this would
really
be a
come
great
out.
social proof for them as well.
Exactly.
Right? Because
Exactly. It's very risky because if they don't have the chops,
that's right.
they'll be shown as someone who is afraid, and so or candidly doesn't have good stage presence, and that is, how do I say this delicately? That's one of the problems. You can be a great leader and not have great stage presence. And so one of the problems you would have is putting someone in this kind of a format, if they know they don't have good stage presence, might be something politically they just don't want to do. Not because they're afraid of the conversation, but they know they don't come off well.
Right. But I think it would be if they would view some of our episodes and they would see how of a conversation. This is not even an interview in a sense of like.
It's not an interview.
It's not an interrogation. It's not like I'm going to, oh, gotcha. Like, you know, it's more of a who you really are as a person and getting that in a conversation so that people can really get to know you instead of like I'm a great showman and I'm really great public speaker so I can deliver everything really sharp to the camera so people are like, oh yeah, look at that guy, you know, or gal, like they really got everything together. But that might be just your 5-minute TED Talk that was just polished, and then there's nothing else behind the curtain.
That's right. Right? That's right.
So what do you want? Do you want that, or do you want an hour?
Some depth and some human being. I love where you're going there. We learned this in our original work at the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy, and it works for politics too. And so it occurs to me that you could use this. We found that the first thing you do to build trust between people who probably disagree greatly is have dinner with them privately, to have them meet for dinner or lunch or breakfast, but to break bread together and agree to discuss at that time what they want to discuss in public and set an agenda. In other words, where they're safe and they can have that conversation. They can both play it out and say, I know I don't want to have that topic. Okay. What can we discuss? All right. So they do negotiate the topics they will address. Right. And they have it over bread. But you have to ask them this. This is where I'm giving you my special sauce. Right. This is the special sauce. They have to start their conversation with one question that they agree both to address. And that is, how did they come to their deepest values in their life? Not what you're not asking what their values are. Tell me the story of how you came to your deepest values. Tell me your story, and then have them agree to relax, sit back, and if it takes 10, 15 minutes to tell the story, that's great. Your viewers will be blown away. Right. And the guy or gal who's listening will also be blown away, and then when he or she has her turn, it's an amazing experience. So start there, and then everything after that is just icing on the cake. Right. But if a person can tell you how I became this rabid Democrat, how? It's a great story. Right. It's, his grandfather did this, my mother beat my dad. I don't know what psychology, my psychology. There are all sorts of stories. It can come from religion. It can come from something happened. It can come from all sorts of places. But it's fascinating. Thinking about that right now, you just don't get that. No. Right? You're going to go to like some senator's webpage. They're going to, here's the bio, how accomplished and everything they are. There's no how they got there. Right. You don't get that. Or seldomly you get that where someone shares that on somewhere. This is great. I love it. That's it. I love it. If you can pull that off, I think this is a great point to. And they wouldn't mind doing that because most people realize that if you're sincere, they'll get what you're trying to do. Well, we're going to start. I already know one person who is getting into politics, and I had her on my show, Karen Hyatt, and she was literally collecting the signatures for the referendum to look back at the tax increases recently that passed not too long ago. And so I had her on the show, and I enjoyed the conversation. Very smart lady. Huge knowledge of the Constitution, and I said, like, I feel like you have this in you where you should be exploring this, and I'm tickled, like it's like that she's pursuing it right now, because again,
you get to know the person, and it was through that long conversation.
Yep.
And so
you'll never have that kind of
Fantastic.
conversation unless they have the time.
Fantastic.
Because they've got to feel like you're sincere. I'm about ready to tell you my personal life story.
Yeah.
Well, you better treat it with some degree of care.
Right.
And that's where you as a moderator can get them together first.
Right.
To say, that's the only question you're asking.
That's it.
That you're requiring of them.
Stepping away.
After that, they can do whatever
I
they
love
want.
that. Thank you for that idea. I think I'm going to pull on that thread a little bit, because I think that's how we can start this. And what a great, and especially now in these days when you have the so many podcasts and so many platforms where this can be literally put out there. I mean, if this would just kind of replicate and everyone would have that.
You've
locally,
seen it.
How great would that be?
In journalism, any place, if someone has the guts to say it, and the other person has the respect to hear it, and then reciprocate, again, if it can be mutual, it's amazing what happens.
Well, we're going to leave it at that. I have a feeling you're going to be back on the show over here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about additional stuff. And also want to invite you on behalf of my wife, because I think you both will have an interesting topic to talk about from a psychology and
the psychology of trust
of trust
in both human relationships and in politics. They're deeply related.
Before we close out, what is in the immediate future of the World Table?
We are on about probably 50 newspapers right now. We want to be on about 500. We'll be breaking even at the end of this year if we get up on another 50. So if we're on about 100 newspapers, we'll be actually able to break even and be a going concern, right? We're a business. So it's got to work that way.
Right.
The future is to really be on, at least in the English-speaking world, be the primary engagement suite, we call it, for journalism. Not just commenting, but we have other things up our sleeve that we have learned that would help the public engage with journalists, and journalists should engage with the public in a respectful way, not the journalists looking down on the public, saying, oh, we got to deal with these people, but actually find a way of amplifying that relationship in the new interactive world. So our goal is to make a profit out of the journalistic silo. Then we have an education silo that you personally would be very interested in, because I can see where your interests are in education. And we could talk about that, but I've already hinted at a few things that could happen there to teach people how to have these engagements.
Yeah, you need to start that process early on, so it becomes like a natural thing for the youngsters to kind of like, this is how things happen.
Yeah, instead of teaching them about religions,
right,
teach them how to engage in the difficult contest between religions that's always going to exist. Instead of talking about politics, how to engage in the difficult contest of politics. How to. Why don't we teach them that? Why don't we get into social psychology? We haven't. It's all been book learning, like you said earlier today. Yeah. You're interested in taking learning and making it a practical change in society. Yeah. And that's what we're interested in doing. So that's second. And then, of course, there's the commercial silo that the World Table could influence, and the political one. If we get big data going, we could actually be a great data source for what's being engaged. If people disclose more and more of themselves, and they agree to allow us to do it, there's always an ethical issue here, right? And I'm very well aware of that. But if they're World Tablers, and they want to be part of a society that is more open, then we can use that data to quickly find out what's going on in different segments of the society, and we could sell it to the appropriate people. We are a public benefit corporation. We're profit making, but we also have a stipulated cause. And if we do not, we can be sued by our shareholders if we're not trying to make a profit, and if we're not doing what we stipulate we're trying to do, which is to build trustworthy engagement in online interaction. And so that's a big purpose that we can go all over the place.
That is a massive, massive undertaking, and I'm thrilled and happy that there is someone like you who is pushing that, because where things are going right now in terms of news and just trust globally, and it's all fake news and trolling and all of that, is taking us to nowhere good.
Right. And
we can't continue that, and someone has to be doing something actively towards fixing it. And I believe that it's going to take, it's not going to be just one, it's not going to be just Google or one of these big guys. It's going to be like these smaller things that will just rise up.
Various human beings and good algorithms are able to vet what's going on. And so no one past a first grade education would think about taking just one snippet of news and assuming that's true anymore.
Right. Because of this new model.
Yeah, because of the new model. We've got to have more voices.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I wish you well, and I hopefully we're going to have you back on the show and talk about some other things, because before we started recording this, we chatted a little bit, and I know there's some other points of interest that would love to talk about. So thank you again for being on the show.
Adrian, it was great to get to know you. Blessings on your work.
Thank you very much. And we're going to put in the show notes where people can contact you, but your main website is...
if they're interested in the World Table, it's worldtable.co. I think it's HTTPS, / www.worldtable.co.
Yeah.
It's a long one.
I think if I looked it up today, it was worldtable.co, and that gets you to the website.
Did it get it to us?
Yeah, it got to you guys. So, but we'll put everything in the show notes as well, and we will make sure that people who are interested in working with you guys get connected. But thank you for giving me a different perspective, and I'm very optimistic, or more optimistic than I was before, in terms of like where the future is going to be.
Yeah, if we could just have trustworthy contestation.
Yeah,
in other words, trustworthy contestation, where we trust our opponent to at least respect us enough to hear us, and we will do the same for them. Then there's a hope. There's a hope. You said something earlier that I'd like to talk to you about later in another one, where American politics is a win-lose game in the short term. It is. That's what an election is.
Right.
It's a win-lose game. But in the long term, it can't be, or our republic goes down. That's what a great republic is. In the long term, it isn't a win-lose game. You've got to realize that the loser will be a winner again.
Right.
You know what I mean?
What I would add to that, to kind of clarify my thoughts on it, is it is a win-lose because someone has to get elected, right?
Yes.
And without going into whether the whole system needs to maybe change in the future, but the all those lines that get to that point, it can be not just one or the other side, not one or the other team. If, let's say, a Democrat and a Republican, and they have this discourse, this conversation, and in such a space in which they can mesh some of their ideas and hammer things out, then that's the winning thing.
I see.
Not that my package or your package, but not a combination of our packages that, that makes sense that we hammered out.
Yeah.
So I think that's the winning thing.
Yeah, I think there's in that sense, there's a lot of win-win space.
Yeah.
Sometime when we get together again, we can talk about abortion. We can talk about situations where it's very difficult to have a win-win.
Right.
And those are interesting to deal with. Very interesting to deal with.
So that's
democracy.
what we're going to leave out with, like a little teaser, what we're going to talk about in the future, because I would love to hear more stories that your experience, especially in the religious, because that is such a heated topic, but also like, can there be a win-win, or is it going to be like, how is it, we think about these conflicts where you have, Israel and Palestine or different worlds where just, how can you even make something work, right? And so I'd love to hear more, of your...
The Foundation for Religious Diplomacy has an initiative going on in Iran. I've been over there. We've got one going on in Egypt and in Israel. So yes, we've got plenty to talk about those very difficult situations, but they're difficult in our own country too. So let's do it. Let's
Fantastic.
do it. I think
Well, thank you for being on the show.
I'd shake hands with you, but it's a COVID day.
That's right. That's right.